Welcome, and thank you for tuning in to listen to our panel discussion, Realising the Future, Delivering Innovation whilst Optimising Legacy Systems. I'm Roz Barrance, Head of Business Development for Leidos UK's Civil Division, and I'll be moderating today. It's great to be here, and many thanks to my panel for joining me for what I hope will be an informative and enjoyable session. It's been recognised as a challenge for some time in the public sector, so unsurprisingly, the recent Declaration on Government Reform, published in June this year, cites the need to invest in the latest technology and replace legacy IT systems that are overly complex and difficult to use. Importantly, our citizens increasingly expect the public sector to make the best use of technology and delivery of services, to make them accessible, helpful, relevant today and in the future. And this expectation has only increased during the pandemic. But costly legacy systems are all there for a reason. They've been built up over many years to support changing legislation and urgent policy requirements. They contain workarounds, temporary solutions, some many years old that are not sustainable and add layers of complexity and therefore cost. So how do we maintain the availability of critical and resilient public services, embracing both the heritage and the modern worlds? How do we work together to ensure digital and business transformation goes hand in hand to deliver high quality, user-centric, data-driven and innovative digital services of the future? How do we actually go about operationally delivering this? We've got some really great experience on the panel today, and this is a timely conversation given the release of the National Audit Office report in July on the challenges in implementing digital change, and more recently, the House of Commons Public Accounts Committee in September with their report published earlier this month. So let's get started. Over to my panel for introductions. Brian, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me. My name is Brian Kennedy. I'm the Head of Efficiencies and Technology at the Accountant in Bankruptcy, which is an agency of the Scottish Government that deals with bankruptcy, debt relief, and other financial matters.
Thanks, Brian. Steve, good afternoon.
Hi, everybody. My name's Steve Thompson. I'm a Programme Director in the Home Office. And I'm going to be speaking today about my experience as the Programme Director of a transformation programme, which I led for 5 years, which was looking at the replacement of 2 legacy systems with a cloud-based solution.
Thanks, Steve. And finally, Mark, good afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon, Roz. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Mark Watson. I'm the Chief Architect for the Civil Division of Leidos UK.
Great, lovely. Thanks all for joining me. So Brian, let's kick off with you. Can you tell us a bit about a recent digital transformation that you've been through, please?
Certainly. We have moved from an internal case management system, which we had in place in 2015, and we moved our whole bankruptcy system to a website-based system that faces the external market and allows access to their cases for the first time. We've gone from having somewhere around 150 users to having somewhere around 15,000 users. We had a major task, very heavily administrative processes, massive amount of paper, a lot of manual intervention by us specifically. And we felt that the time was right to try and move away from that process and give us much more time to actually assess the applications that we receive. As all system changes are, they're awkward, and the staff that moan about the system that you're replacing always suddenly turn on a sixpence to tell you it's the best system they've ever had, and that only happens when you're trying to take it off them. So we had a lot of internal discussions. It was a big project. We were fortunate to have a very good supplier in yourselves, who had been working with Accounting and Bankruptcy for a number of years prior to these changes. And we had built up a very good relationship, one of trust and getting the job done, which was key. And that it's been done incrementally. The first kind of sprint release live, if you like, was in 2015. And from 2015 until this very day, we are still making enhancements to those systems. There was 3 main systems involved, and as we continue to partner with Leidos, we it's an ever-changing market, and we have ever-changing needs, and we constantly are updating these systems. But it had a kind of sea change for AIB. Just off the top of my head, some of the benefits. Our workforce in 2015 was 180 staff. It's now 115. Our KPI for processing a bankruptcy application was 10 days. It's now 1.4 days. We're basically digital. We're not quite paperless, but we're basically 95% digital now. And in these ongoing times that we're going through at the moment, that has been absolutely vital, and a key change for us to enable us to continue working from the home, etc., and still serving the client, which would have been far, far more difficult if we'd still had that internal case management system.
Gosh, Brian, sounds like there was a lot going on. So out of all of that, what would you say the main issues were that you encountered? And importantly, what did you do to get past them?
Data migration. I always say that now because that just breaks me out in a cold sweat whenever I think about data migration. That was a massive task. We had something like, we had cases going back to 2003, 2004. 45,000, 60,000 cases, on two systems coming into one system. I think we had an IT team that supported 180 staff that suddenly supported 15,000 people, and we had to refigure the team to be able to cope with that. We had to come up with ways of trying to control that communication. If somebody can't get into that system, they're phoning you up at that instant to tell you that they can't get into that system. And we had to devise ways of trying, a help desk type scenario to try and control the traffic coming to us. And as I said earlier, the buy-in from staff, when you launch an IT system, and we had numerous workshops with the staff, and we had training events where you're telling people this is how this system's going to work, and this is what it's going to do, and these are the benefits and how much quicker it's going to be. And then when you go live with your alpha, it's never spot on. So there's always wee nitpicky things. And when it's such a big system, there's those add up. Those can add up to quite detrimental issues. So we just had to make sure that the team was scaled up, and a lot of temporary promotion we used for that, because we at the time of going live, we weren't sure how long that was going to last. You're not aiming to launch a poor product, so you've got a good product, but there's always teething issues. So we're hoping to resolve those teething issues, and you also don't know what the communication and buy-in externally is going to be like until it absolutely happens. The other thing I think that we didn't do that I wish we had was we tested the system in and out. But the one thing we didn't test, and I've never made this mistake again, is we didn't really load test it. So we were, as I say, we built it around the standard website, but we weren't. Those first few days, everybody was trying to get into that system to register themselves, to register their organisations, to register debtors, and we had some real speed issues initially, and that would have been prevented, I think. Maybe not entirely, but that could have been prevented if we'd done some significant load testing. As I say, we've never made that mistake twice, but I always come back to data migration and then have a small shiver and finish there.
Thanks, Brian. Some really valuable experience there, and hopefully experience that others can use, that they can reuse your experience and not encounter some of those challenges. Steve, does this echo with the transformation that you were working on? Could you start by telling us a little bit about the project that you were involved in, please?
Sure. Yeah. Well, the program I'm going to talk about was the National Law Enforcement Data Program. So that was originally started in 2016, and the scope of that program was to then replace and supersede the functionality contained with the PNC, the Police National Computer, and P&D, the Police National Database. So the former is a record of criminal history of a person, vehicle, and property, and the latter is intelligence information from all the police forces in the UK. And the scope of that program was to not only supersede it with something called the Law Enforcement Data Service, but that Law Enforcement Data Service would also be cloud-based. Neither of those systems were currently in the cloud. One's a 45-year-old mainframe-based ecosystem, The other one's a 10-year in design Oracle-based system, both on premises. So the challenge really was to also get the stakeholders buy-in to moving that data set into a cloud environment where that permission didn't currently exist. So any one of those challenges would probably have been enough for the original scope of a 5-year change program, let alone all three at the same time. If you add to that that the program was executed in an operating environment where, from a home office perspective, maturity was growing with the acceptance of cloud, and models for official sensitive, accredited and approved patterns for holding that data in cloud were yet to exist. So at the start of that, we spun up a team which basically looked at the discovery analysis of P&C, while at the same time, on a slower burn, looking at the functionality of P&D, but at the same time trying to marry those worlds of quite a transactional lookup to a more non-fact-based system, which has less structured data, and trying to marry those two worlds of the user need. So I think from the start, there was quite a lot of difficulty with that, but also then getting the acceptance of the stakeholder group policing to adopt cloud. And we actually embarked on a model of about 65 security controls and about another 18 to 20 management or policy controls, which were born out of a risk paper, which we assessed the cloud environment on, and then had to implement those security controls. So it was about 2.5 years of building cloud environments from scratch in those days, not using native cloud-based controls, such as the like in Microsoft and Amazon. We had to design our own on-premise HSMs for key management, things like that. So that was very hard. Took a lot longer than expected. And then not only that, once we'd done the analysis of P&C, we found that some of the initial analysis hadn't gone deep enough into the business rules, and we had to do further work in terms of that analysis, which I think probably rings true for some of the people on this panel in terms of a 45-year-old ecosystem. As you dig deeper and deeper and find areas that are not documented, linkages between modules that are written in code that's no longer written, business rules that are basically part of everyday working process. So some of the flaws in the system are actually part of working practice and process. You realise that there's quite a lot more to uncover. And I think part of the story is that analysis on P&C still continues to this day. And the programme has been rescoped to focus on just P&C. So I think ambition and the size of the initial scope was something that was quite a strong lesson learned.
Yeah, thanks for that, Steve, and yourself, Brian. To go over that, Brian, your transformation has been continuous over the past 10 years and successfully moved from a paper-based service to a fully digitized one, which enables your end users to get the help they need in a more efficient manner. This is a huge benefit to people facing bankruptcy, and providing advice and guidance early in their journey will alleviate a lot of their worries. By automating a lot of the standard processes through transformation, your workforce are now able to concentrate on the more complex and non-normal issues, which I guess does two things. It brings greater help at pace to your end users, but it also allows you to upskill your workforce and help keep them motivated. I also believe over your 10-year transformation journey, you've refined how you do things as you learn from past mistakes along the way, such as introducing lesson learned sessions at the end of every sprint rather than at the end of every project. And Steve, a 45-year-old critical national infrastructure made up of 200 odd systems and feeds, moving to a public cloud is a huge undertaking. I understand the project needs a level of bespoke coding and architecture for it to work. However, I wonder if there has evolved over the time that you're able to work towards a more standard architectural blueprints and ways of working, which will simplify your systems in the way that they're built and supported going forwards.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. So in terms of So reference architecture, we're certainly working along a path towards a reference architecture, not within the policing space only, but within the digital and data environment within the Home Office, across many of the other portfolios as well. So that's the aim. We're developing with product teams, so decomposing the current systems into respective products, and then further decomposition if necessary around a personal, say a vehicle search, for instance. And that's the mode of delivery. Agile-based teams, so all the ceremonies you would normally expect. But key to the differences now, and the program has been reset over the past year, is that we've got a key ownership of the user requirement from a named policing owner, which represents UK Policing PLC, if you like, for each of the products. And the team is centered around product ownership, product management, and then the relevant technical disciplines as well, falling out of that for the rest of the team.
Thanks, Steve. That really does make quite a lot of sense. Another question for you, Steve, and this is really at the heart of the discussion, I think, is how do you manage the balance between ensuring that your current service is fully operational, meets all its SLAs, KPIs, whilst the people that are supporting it and have the knowledge about it are also being taken away from you and being asked to input into the future design and transformation? So how do you manage those conflicting priorities?
Well, people and skills are absolutely vital, right? I mean, it's really tricky. This has been one of the most critical issues for this program now and going forwards. So the people who run the current service are absolutely vital. That service is CNI, as you say, Mark, and cannot go down. It must be maintained. So that is the priority for the people running the current system. But those people have been around for the same length of time as that ecosystem. And they are some of the only people who know how that system works, and that code and that language is not practiced anymore. So the challenge we've got is we're dependent on those people as well for migration to the new system and for some of their inbuilt know-how for the business rules and logic and how the modules link. So we do have a massive challenge in that we're reliant on those people, but they have to run the live service. So the change program is actually dependent on those people. Trying to backfill and free up those people so that they can help with some of the migration to cloud and the analysis of the system is a key issue, which will run throughout the next 5 years potentially of the program. I think going into that with eyes open and seeing how you can share resources, how you can backfill, how you can find some ways through that, although not easy, and potentially an acceptable risk and a tolerable risk that you have to maintain all the way through the program, is something that needs to be thought through very carefully at the start.
Thanks, Steve. A constant balancing act, and one that will need to run on for a period of time yet, by the sounds of it. Brian, how do you ensure you've got the right skills and the right number of people to support the modernisation that you underwent, whilst obviously continuing to run the existing live operations?
Well, I mean, obviously, prior to the transformation, you are continually updating an internal IT system. What AIB saw was that we would pay a lot of money for consultants to come in and do some work for us and then leave, and all the knowledge left. So we took the view prior to the transformation starting of trying to upskill our own workforce. Including myself in that, we put a few people through business analyst diplomas. We have some senior IT people that we recruited. We procured the IT development skills, because it doesn't make sense for our agency to have IT developers, etc. And we procured that from the through the normal tender process. And a wee bit like Steve was saying there was a bit of suck it and see. I'm not going to lie. You don't know. There's no point me recruiting 20 IT professionals expecting lots of calls and lots of inquiries, and then 19 of them are sitting doing nothing. So we got a certain skill base around doing the workshops to make sure the system was as accurate as it could be. And then we had some temporary promotion posts, etc., to allow people to experience. And if we knew that we needed those posts permanently, we could then recruit quite quickly because we had an experienced base who'd already been in that role. And I think from the tender perspective and the supplier perspective, that, you know, again, echoing what Steve says about agile, but there's also a lot of, there's got to be give and take in that relationship, or you end up in a you know, constant change meeting discussing costs of change. And so, you know, the agile approach gives you a kind of understanding that things might not be exactly as you said them in a tender 3 years previously, kind of thing. So a lot of people are key. Building relationships are key. I think relationships are key, especially between, if you look at yourself as in a bubble, your relationship between the rest of the workforce that you are with, the relationship with your external people, and the relationship with your partner stroke supplier of IT skills. So yeah, just focusing on that. We spent a lot of time on that.
Thanks,
Brian. Oh yeah, sorry.
Sorry, I was going to just jump in. I think what Brian says is really important there, and just to build on that as well. At the beginning, that iterative nature of working with the existing workforce and the new change program, at the beginning, you're very dependent on data connectivity, environments, in-depth business rule knowledge, that kind of stuff. And as you progress through that product delivery machine, and as I say, the reset program is getting going again, once it gets a bit more mature and it, you know, it sees what's needed as part of that BAU delivery from a data connectivity, environments, business rules point of view, there is that transition between old and new staff, if you like. And I think that's really important, as Brian was alluding to there.
Yeah, totally agree with that, Steve. Thank you. Brian, I've seen organisations push to move their services to the cloud because there's a perception that this is what they should be doing from a cost and technology viewpoint. However, some of these organisations do not take the opportunity to transform their service. They simply recreate it in the cloud. This may not necessarily be the most cost effective and is unlikely unrecommended in my view. Moving a service as is from one platform to another will bring all the existing bugs and workarounds that the users perform because the current system has issues. The migrated system will not easily be able to take advantages of the services that a modern cloud platform provides, such as elasticity, PaaS, and SaaS components. In 2020, Microsoft spent circa $21 billion, Amazon spent $42 billion, and Google spent $28 billion on research and development. This colossal amount of money ensures that public cloud platforms are delivering cutting-edge components that organizations should be looking to leverage. A simple lift and shift will ignore this huge R&D investment. However, I also understand that the users of the systems are often resistant to change, as you mentioned before. They know how to do their job and they don't want to learn a new system. Standing up user groups where they have a voice and input to future systems is a very effective way of bringing users on the journey with the business, allowing their contributions to be valued and feel that something is being done, not being done to them, but actually being done with them. And it's a great way of ensuring that the technology changes are adopted quickly and deliver the required benefits to the end users at pace. Was this something that you included as part of your modernisation, Brian?
Absolutely. I think, how do you explain? There's a funny thing about users, but if you think of a system as 100%, an individual user will be lucky to use 15% of that 100%. And that is the key 15% for them, isn't it? We had a massive amount of workshops. You know, we had the happy path. I'm sure everybody's heard of a happy path. You know, what does this system absolutely have to do? And then, you know, what's the add-ons to that? And making sure the people that aren't on the happy path are included as well is key. I think Agile is very helpful when it comes to that, because you can build and you can require build. But if you're putting together a large system, that can still trip you up if your first workshop about a certain area was 2 years ago and you're going live and then you have to, you know, it isn't quite right. But so And the other thing I would say that Steve mentioned the legacy staff and how they were key at the beginning. I think that's absolutely true. But I also think when you're moving through these workshops, it's also very good to have a fresh pair of eyes. We do an induction for new staff, and I'm one of the people that talk about it because I'm head of IT. And I always say to them, you're key to me in the next month because you've never seen any of this before. And you'll spot things that other people just take as accepted now. As Steve said, we had working practices that bent round the IT system, and we had work procedures that did that. And so getting fresh pairs of eyes in the room as well are key. But yeah, workshops, you must have user buy-in, and that includes externals, because for the first time they were going to see. I mean, one of the problems we had was at the moment, pre the websites, debtors would phone their money advisor and say how much do they owe, and they would phone us or they would phone whoever, and it was never accurate. Now debtors can look at their information live, and if it's not right, they're giving us a call. So it has to be, but we had, persuading people who are bankrupt to help with that. They're not the most willing of people to get involved. So, but it was key that we spoke to them. They had to know. We had to know what they wanted to see, and then making compartments so that piece of information is absolutely key. Reputationally, if that's wrong, the rest, it doesn't matter if the rest of the system works. That's wrong. So, making sure at the beginning that you had your stakeholder map. Who do we need to speak to? Who's the key stakeholders within those groups, and get them into a room as well. So, yeah, you could spend years in workshops, but for something as transformational as that, it was essential.
Thanks, Brian. And sounds like critical to get that user input, but often challenging to get the user community engaged. Steve, you mentioned at the beginning that as part of the program reset, you'd also reset some of the relationships with your stakeholders. In terms of some of the things Brian spoke about, is this something you're doing with your transformation? How have you engaged users and looked at the future service?
Absolutely. I mean, at the very beginning, there was a faster horses, please kind of discussion, which, no one really wants, but we didn't know how to break out of it, I think. And there was a request for a direct mapping of functionality between the existing systems and the new systems. So we did that massive piece of work, everything that P&C did, P&D did, and how Leidos replacing it would fulfill all that. And of course, that could just end up in, as I think you said earlier, representing or recreating the legacy environment in the cloud. You've actually built in the workarounds and foibles and nuances of the legacy systems and recreated them in the current business practice and process. And everyone knows what's going on in the legacy system on the 3 weeks or the week of training that they go on. And so that the legacy system just does it. It's just like that. You have to work around it and know the workarounds. To now, with the product team basis and the product owners conducting user needs and user research based on what the business processes are, what the people actually need to do, what their outcomes they are that are needed, we can now design systems which people look at and they don't spend 80% of their time navigating around the system and 20% of time on the content. It's the other way around. 20% or less of navigation, and the content is super rich and it's holistic about the person or the vehicle or the property or the driver. That's where we want to get to based on real user need, real user research. What does the user need? And then continually, as you enhance that product, to wring more value out of it. So getting the value out of that product until there's nothing left, and then move on to the next product. So that, we hope, is at the core of how we're doing things now. It's not perfect, but that's the way the program is progressing.
Thanks, Steve. So just building on that, and some of the challenges that you faced, particularly considering the age of the system that you've started with. You've touched on some of them, but why do you feel departments still have such challenges in moving away from these legacy systems, recognizing that some of the systems we're dealing with are older than some of the panelists that are here today?
Only some of the panelists. So, I mean, any number. I think that Yeah, I did touch on it, but there's quite a few, I suppose, which are fundamental. The operating environment, we had to provide everything from scratch. Now, that may not be the case with with departments in 2021, but in 2015, it certainly was the case that the networks, the infrastructure, the devices, the tables and chairs, the buildings, but to literally house the program delivery team didn't exist, and the program had to provide those. And then not only that, once it came to it, the cloud environment wasn't just use the bespoke cloud environment tools, we had to build them ourselves. So that was extremely challenging. I think besides security challenges though, the appetite for the user community to do something first of type in the UK was a big ask. And we looked everywhere, including the security agencies, to see if that pattern existed. And it didn't really, for what we wanted to do at scale. So I think that was a big issue. And then in terms of the ownership of the requirement, we've touched on some of these things as we've talked. That absolute ownership, because we had quite a few different competing voices at the beginning of the program for requirements around audit, especially, and in some of the security areas, and getting that alignment across such a number of key stakeholders who are ultimately paying, for the service, is very difficult. So I think now we've got a much better approach to getting the requirement owned, because we're the technical delivery folk, we can't own the requirement. That is proving, I think, much more productive in terms of relationship and breaking out of that kind of customer supplier relationship that did exist beforehand, very much working in partnership.
Yeah, absolutely. Transforming a large and complex legacy system to modern infrastructure and code is not easy. There's several options to consider, such as waterfall versus agile. Do you lift and shift and then transform at a later date? Or do you keep the lights on your existing services whilst you stand up a new system and then perform some kind of cutover migration? It's important to understand, really important to understand, that end user needs will change over time. Running a 2-year waterfall project will deliver a system that meets the requirements set 24 months ago. These requirements may no longer satisfy all your customers' needs. Having a mechanism to effect change throughout the transformation, such as Agile, will deliver a far better service to your end users. For some organizations, this approach can be difficult for them to cost and create a compelling business case, but it's not impossible. It's my experience that 99% of organizations that switch from waterfall to Agile never want to go back, and that was echoed by Brian. They realize the benefits of delivering small components of the overall system throughout the transformation timeline, rather than waiting for a big bang in 24 months. They also see that their service meets the current needs of their customers and is able to change at pace to meet all the future needs of their customers as they evolve. So delivering services that truly meet customers' needs is something that we all strive to do. And I believe that modern platforms and processes are making this easier and quicker than ever before.
Thanks, Mark. And good conversation around how we ensure that user needs are met as part of these challenging programs. But there's something we haven't touched on here, and that's that we're delivering projects in the public sector. There's a really key consideration, which is actually understanding the cost of those projects. So I'm going to flip back to Brian. Brian, how did you work to keep the right balance whilst working in this new agile environment between responding to user demand for new functions, but also keeping within affordable budgets?
Well, when delivering the system as a launch system, the key around that is the tender process, and make sure that the solid requirements that you need for that system are contained within that, and you get the price for that. And we went for a fixed cost price. So, and there's going to be changes, as Mark's mentioned, agilely, but as long as you're borrowing work from somewhere else to pay for it somewhere else, the cost remains the same. I think the key issues when you're enhancing these systems moving forward, we've got 3 major systems that come under the kind of debt arm of AIB, and the only way I would consider my own team to be a service team. We provide a service. We can't direct the business in terms of what is the most operational priorities. What's the biggest priorities for operations? So we've got this very standard program boards. I'm a program manager in AIB. Department heads, and we use a few tools that allow us to capture requirements from business areas. So you're always capturing a requirement. You're never refusing the opportunity to capture something. And then you lay that out, you get a cost from the developer, and then we have a kind of priority table, and that's discussed by the operational heads. And of course, the new thing for AIB, and I don't think even to this day we're not 100% there yet, is we get these requests from external to AIB, will you do this? And we have launched a couple of times where a main user has said to us, for example, we built an API to one of our systems that wasn't built using an API functionality. And one of the major players in this industry was saying that it would be great if you had an API, and we had a kind of negotiation. It would be mutually beneficial, and we were able to come to an agreement in terms of cost share to build that service. And then you've got to persuade the rest of the business that actually could you take a back seat while we build this API, but you've got to have that overall view, and it has to be senior enough to enable people to be told no. And that's where the program board comes in. It's mainly the senior people in AIB that would make the decisions in terms of priorities, including whether external development is made.
Yeah, okay. So it's that careful balance, and also making sure that there's visibility of everything that's going on as part of that program board to make sure that the right prioritization decisions are being made, because of course the demand just continues, Brian. However much you've delivered, the demands, they just keep coming. Thank you very much for that. Mark, just building on the comments from Brian, I know you've spoken and worked with a number of our customers. We've picked up a number of different areas of challenge. So how do you deal with stakeholders, complex stakeholder landscape, user needs, migration to cloud? What other challenges do you see across the industry with transforming legacy services?
Okay, so as we said, legacy services have normally grown up over many years and had multiple changes made to them by multiple people. The people who originally built the services have normally moved on to other organizations, and you end up with a highly complex set of code and infrastructure that nobody quite knows how it all fits together and integrates with each other. How to meet this challenge is all about people and skills, as Steve has alluded to. Organizations need to understand that modern software and infrastructure skills are important, but also so are heritage skills. SMEs with heritage skills are vitally important to maintain the current systems as they are transformed. They're even more important, giving insight into what a particular technology is providing. The analysis, unpicking of existing systems to understand what should stay, what should be changed, and what should be abandoned is only possible when you have people with a deep understanding of the today and heritage. Organizations need to value their SMEs and ensure they do what is needed to keep them happy and motivated. Many of these SMEs will welcome training and upskilling to newer technologies and should be encouraged to do so. I believe that SMEs with knowledge of heritage systems and newly transformed systems are key assets, and organizations should recognize this.
Thanks, Mark, and completely agree. The migration to the new is never going to be achieved without the experience of the old. Thank you very much for that. Great discussion, guys. Thank you very much. Any final thoughts that you would like to share as part of today's session? Steve, anything from yourself?
Well, thank you for the opportunity for sharing experiences. And I think it's probably just reflecting on some of the points that Brian and Mark have both made around the criticality of the people who are currently running those systems today. And, we're going through a process of, who's interested and how do we get you retrained to be part of the new world. And that really is quite a journey, isn't it? That probably is, second only to the technology transformation in terms of years, because these things take a lot of time to move people from systems that have been around for tens of decades. Not tens of decades, sorry.
They're not quite that old.
Multiple decades. Yeah, we can edit that word out maybe.
Thanks, Steve. Brian?
Yeah, I guess the one thing I would say going forward, or two things I would say going forward, if we'd had this conversation 5 years ago, we wouldn't have thought about cybersecurity. Cybersecurity has exploded. And so you have to build your systems now with a view to that. And I think that's just the way that's life now. Second thing is, how do you launch a new system without the pain? How do you reduce the pain? And I think this goes back to what Mark said about there's no point shifting your system into the cloud as is. And it's about building the components of the system separately and then bringing it together and finding a way so that the core functionality for the user is one component. The users are a component, the organizations are a component, etc., etc. And if you need to change a bit of functionality, you can do that. If you need to launch a brand new system, you can actually take the components from the existing systems and you don't need to rebuild them. And that's kind of where we're heading now. I don't want to launch another system, and it's because it's stressful. It costs a lot of money. It can cause a lot of pain, anxiety. So how do we launch new products without removing that? And I think that is small is best, and breaking these components down. I think the cloud gives the opportunity to do lots of these things because of the flexibility. I mean, we're actually just now, we've got to get a system off a 2008 server because if we can't get it off by the 14th of January, we'll lose our cybersecurity certification. You know, all that pain goes away with the cloud. So I think it's not being scared of that. It's actually taking that head on. That's what I would say.
Yeah, and having those new environments that allow that iterative, continued change rather than
Absolutely.
some of the much larger transformational pieces that you guys have had to undertake. Mark, any final comments from you?
I think my final comment is to the viewers watching this. Please feel free to comment, get involved, reach out, to get in touch, to share your experiences. Let us know what we think we've got right, what we've got wrong, and wider the discussion on this going forwards would be a really good thing to take away from this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Absolutely. And I think that's important that we all learn from each other. So a huge thank you from me to you for you sharing so openly your insights, your challenges, how you got past some of them, and importantly, how you continue to get past them, whether that's migration to cloud, ensuring appropriate security controls, meeting challenging user needs, and in some cases, resistance to change, complex business rules. I hope everyone listening have found some useful takeaways. And as Mark says, please do let us know your experience and share that with us, and we'd love to engage in further conversation. Just to close on this, we're talking about digital transformation and we're talking about technology, but actually through all of this, it's recognizing that people are fundamental to success. Their requirements, their knowledge, their skills, their flexibility, their commitment, their patience, their persistence, their resilience, and their innovation. We can't move forward with digital transformation without people, whether it's the people that are involved in delivering the legacy today or those that are involved in the future. And I think it's also about recognizing that no one person has all of the answers. Collaboration and communication are going to be key to success. With everyone working together across boundaries, even if perceived boundaries, is a foundation for really realizing the benefits that true digital transformation can bring. So I hope we can take some of the thoughts from today and turn the table on the legacy. So rather than the support of our systems costing more than innovation, actually we're able to drive forward innovative approaches to enable the public services of the future. So thank you again, everybody. I'll bring the session to close. I've really enjoyed this and hope our listeners enjoy it as much as I did. Thank you.
Thank you, Roz. Thanks all.
Cheers.
Cheers.